I'm Rebecca, interviewing a community expert, a longtime community expert, maybe the most expert of community experts, Jeff Barr, the Vice President and Chief Evangelist at Amazon Web Services, or AWS, as it's often known and often belovedly called. Let's begin. Jeff, thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here, Rebecca. I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm, as I have said, a longtime listener, longtime caller, and I've racked my brain for a good way to begin this interview. But it's really hard to think of ways to begin an interview with a legend, and I don't say that lightly. Um, I actually just recorded a podcast for Jeremy Daly's 100th Serverless Chats episode, and we talk about you quite a bit.
Oh my.
Um, yeah, we really talk about, and we'll get into this a little later, but we talk about your principled desire to be relatable and accessible in the content that you write and create for other people in the community. So before we get started, to help set context for our audience, you're the Vice President and Chief Evangelist at AWS. And you've been at AWS for nearly 2 decades. You started in 2002. Correct me if that's wrong, but I did a little sneaky, I guess unsneaky public snooping. And when you started in 2002, you started as a web services evangelist. You're evangelizing before evangelism was hip. And you are, as some people call it, literally the godfather of community building and product advocacy, by way of that personability and accessibility of your educational content. So that's a super long intro, but you've had a super long career. And before we dive too far in, will you take us in your way back machine and tell us a bit about where you are today, where you're based, what you focus your time on, and why you think community building is important?
Sure. Okay. So I'm based in Seattle. And like you said, I've been working for Amazon for almost 2 decades. And I think for my entire career, I've really enjoyed being effectively right on the border or the intersection of the tech and the marketing. And even very early in my career, my first job that I was getting paid for was at a computer store here in Seattle. And my official task was just to take all of the books and magazines and literature out of the boxes and put them on the shelves. But what I actually did is I spent a lot of time reading all of this material before I put it on the shelves. And that meant that even though I was 17 years old at the time, I had this really good understanding of the hardware and the software and the companies. And so naturally, people would come in the store and ask questions. And the other employees, they hadn't put in that energy to really study, but they'd say, talk to that long haired kid over there in the corner. He'll tell you all about it. And I just really enjoyed explaining things. And I'm doing the same job 40 plus years later now.
So in 2002, evangelism was, perhaps around in certain ways, but I mean, really, the entire cloud development space was just emerging, and that seems crazy to say, but is true. And then second, as that was just emerging, I'm wondering, what did having evangelism in your title mean to you back then? And in terms of, I think you sort of set the standard for what evangelism would be, certainly in the cloud development space. And so, what did it mean to you back then, and how has that evolved up until today? What does it mean to you today?
Well, to me, it was really just raising awareness among developers, and developers were really my first audience. And having spent a lot of my career building things with code, and then explaining them, just kind of naturally, it was always like, if I understand this really really well, then I can explain it to myself, and that'll then give me the credibility to tell other people about it. And then if they say, well, sounds interesting on the surface, but can you go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, I always wanted to make sure that I had just a sufficient reservoir of technical depth, that whatever depth level that the other side would like to go to, that I could just go there with them, and that I could really maintain my credibility, not with like a lot of like fancy marketing buzzwords, but with like, okay, well, they say, okay, take us another level in and another level in. I'm like, okay, however deep you'd like to go, I think I can go there with you. And that's become more and more challenging as I've gotten a little bit away from the details of the tech, and maybe a little bit kind of older and into the marketing side a bit. But I still pride myself on whatever I write about, I've personally used it. I've gotten that hands-on experience, and I'm not just talking about what it would be like to use it. I'm saying I actually use this, and this is how it worked for me.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, having had the honor of working with you personally at AWS, I remember a few key times where we'd be working on a blog post, let's say, and you'd be like, if I can't get access to this, I can't write about it. And I loved that principledness, right? And so that's truly something that strikes me about your work is its consistency and its dedication to that reproducibility by someone else who's trying to code alongside you. And those principles that you have around how you deliver that type of content. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your process. Like, again, I guess I'll ask you to go, like, can you go a little deeper about that process for like building that content? What do you ask yourself? What do you instruct your team to do when they're saying like, hey, is this content that actually helps the developer come alongside me?
Sure. So within our development process at Amazon, we have this really, I think, fairly well known phrase at this point of start from the customer and work backward. And one of the tangible artifacts from that process is a document that we call the PRFAQ, the press release plus frequently asked questions. So one of the first steps when a team approaches me or one of the other bloggers and they would like to have a blog post written, they supply us with that PRFAQ. And the idea is we can read the press release aspect of it usually in a couple of minutes and get a reasonable understanding of what the new service or the new feature is all about. And then we can deep dive into the FAQ, which can often range up to 50 printed pages. Deep dive in there and get an even better idea. So, what my methodology is, and this is something I've refined over the years, I'll generally set up my screen so that I've got the PRFAQ on one half and I use a mind mapping tool on the other half. So as I'm reading through the documents, I'm building this kind of mind map structure that is to me a new, effectively a new data structure representation of all the information in the press release and in the FAQ. So I'm kind of reconstructing visually all the information. And so that means I don't have to somehow try to like capture it all and have it all in my head. Like some people say, wow, you must have like the world's most amazing memory and you can remember these thousands of facts about this service. Not even close. A lot of what I'm doing as I'm getting ready to write is simply organizing the information. And then at the point when I say, okay, I've gotten all organized, then I'm ready to actually start writing. Um, one thing about writing that is always worth sharing is it might look really easy at the end because you've got this really nice, smooth document. Writing is actually really difficult.
Would you recommend the PRFAQ process in such a way to almost any company, right? If you're trying to build your community, if you're trying to build content that is accessible for your community, is that something that you're like, I think this could truly be applied to the way that everyone thinks about building this type of content and having the information beforehand to build on the information that makes sense?
I've certainly seen it to be very, very effective. And back in the old days when we actually used to go to the office, and you would like run into colleagues in the elevator or the hallway, or sometimes literally in the street, and they would say, "Hey, Jeff, good to see you. We're building this really, really cool thing," and you don't even have to ask. They just say, "We're building this really cool thing." They tell you a little bit about it, and the next sentence was always, "We will send you the PRFAQ." So it was this very standardized way to summarize and then detail plans in a way that, and because it was standardized, you'd know what to expect. You'd know that you could scan that press release very, very quickly. And it wasn't simply the document, but also knowing the process that we went through. And when you tell somebody new, you say, well, you need to write a page and a half press release. And they're probably thinking, oh yeah, that's pretty easy. And I'll do that tomorrow afternoon. But we both know that actually getting to the point of a polished, accurate, descriptive, helpful press release, it might go through 20, 30 iterations before you're truly happy with it. And you say, this is what we understand of our customer base, and this is what we want to build. So that polished press release is just, it's worth its weight in gold as far as being able to really to describe what's going on. And then I have to imagine if you're building a dev team and you're bringing a lot of new people on board, you don't want to have to like sit them down individually and say, okay, let's review for you again what it is that we're going to do. This ability to simply say, here's the PRFAQ, take a look and let me know if you have any questions. It's a very powerful communication tool.
What are some of the most enduring channels or enduring approaches or important channels or approaches to leverage when it comes to building community?
Hmm. I don't think there's any one best channel, because everybody has to find the one that works for them and that has kind of their chosen peer group within it. And like I for example love to go to lots and lots of different subreddits, and there's always so many interesting kinds of things happening. There's quite a few that I lurk in. There's just one or two that I actually read faithfully every day. There's just a few that I like to just actually post in. And it's a like I love the AWS subreddit, because the people in there, they are they're positive about AWS for the most part. They know their they know their stuff. They're very, very welcoming to newcomers. And like one of the things that I find fascinating is that there are some communities that are effectively all experts, and they're somewhat closed communities, and it's almost impossible for someone new to to break the barrier and to get to kind of become an insider. And those kind of communities ultimately, they don't thrive. They might think they're wonderful for a while, but ultimately it's easier for them to lose members than to gain members.
Has there been any moments where you have learned from what has been posted on the subreddit, perhaps before you learned it or heard it like another way, where you're like, oh, I never thought about using that product that way?
Oh,
So
all the time, all the time. Like one of the things that is awesome about the AWS subreddit is that the people there know more about AWS, I think, than most of my colleagues and myself do, because the reality is we build it and we then promote it, but these are the people that are actually working with it and using it every day, and their career success depends on their actual ability to use it properly. So there's so much interesting kind of gritty real world experience that you see in a good post, where someone said, well, this looks like a wonderful solution on the surface, and someone else chimes in and says, well, but when you get to like a million requests per second, don't forget about this, and here's an interesting scaling challenge, and here's something that you should keep in mind. It's like it's just priceless knowledge just given freely, which I think might be a really interesting aspect of a community. Just how much you get effectively at no cost other than your attention.
Oh my God, I love that phrase, priceless knowledge given freely. It's like, the ethos of open source, really, and knowledge sharing. And that's great. I'm going to put on a poster if you don't mind. So I'm curious if thinking about all the pieces of content, whether or not that you've read across the years or that you've produced, if there are a few that remain your favorite.
On the technical side, probably when we launched EC2. And the funny thing is that the launch of EC2 had been imminent for months and months and months. So we are going back 15 years at this point. So it was like the spring of 2006, and we're getting ready and we're getting ready. And this is before there's really a marketing organization, before we really have a process of any kind. So the entire process of, I'd like a blog post, can you write a blog post? Here's how you get access, was all managed through my inbox. It was not nearly as formal as it has become in the last 7 or 8 years. And EC2 was imminent for a long time. There were just so many things to figure out. And at the point when they actually picked a date and said, okay, this is the date it's going to launch. Well, of course, it fell right in the middle of a long planned family vacation to Mexico. And it's like, but I'm not going to miss this launch, and I'm not going to miss the vacation. So I took my laptop to Cabo San Lucas with me, and I sat there poolside and squinting to see the screen, got the last details of that blog post written, and they said, go ahead and launch, and away we went. And so I'm pretty far from home, but able to get that post out there and launched, and it still had the hands-on, it still had all the details. And I look back and I said, you know what, I set a really nice model back then of, this is what it is. Here's as many technical details as I can share for you. Here's how to use it. Here's what it costs. Here's how to learn some more. And then that model, I've certainly polished it a bit over the years, but it's pretty much stayed the same.
You're pretty like, you got to have screenshots of code, right? So I think that's also super orienting and like helps someone or understand like, okay, here's what it is, here's how it works, here's the technical details, and also this is what you will see or what I have seen. And I think that's really great, that visual aspect that you add to it as well.
It really is. And one of the things I think about every time I write a post is, no matter how much of a reputation that I've built up over the years, no matter how much credibility I might have earned with my audience, it can all go away with just one less than awesome post. And so you always feel like you're just balanced on top of this. My dog's here kind of clamoring for some attention.
Hello.
She's just going to give her a quick little pat here. Anyway, I always think, well, I've got to get this exactly right, because if there's just, if anything that I show doesn't correspond to what's actually happening, it could look like I was just faking it the whole time, and that would just blow all my credibility. So I try really hard to make sure that every last detail is just absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super palpable, the respect that you have for your audience, and I think that comes through all the time. So thank you for that. So you can't do all of this alone, especially as obviously it's, AWS went from 2, 5, 1 service when you started to what are we at? Maybe 168, 172, somewhere around there.
I heard
And
a time of over 200 last week.
what? Oh, well, I'm a little late on my news. I guess since I joined Common Room, I got to keep up. Well, congratulations on the, that milestone. So as you're building out your team and as you're looking for new evangelists, new community builders, new writers to continue making sure that you create content that is principally relatable and respecting of your audience, I'm curious what you look for.
Well, I like to just look for people that really enjoy communicating. And to me, communicating, it's all about having a great understanding of what you'd like to say, having kind of an identification and an understanding with your audience, and saying, okay, well, I've met some representative sample of this audience in person, and almost to be able to, like, as you're writing, kind of think, well, I'm writing for these very specific people that I've met in the past, and just say, okay, well, can you like, and I remember very specifically meeting random people at events over the years, and they would give me some kind words and some good feedback about a blog post, and in the most non-weird way possible, I would kind of like think of, like, I'll take a mental picture of these folks, and they will be my audience. I will be writing for those specific people the next time I write a blog post. So that I'd say that identification with the audience and saying my job as an evangelist, it's not to make me look good, it's to help out the audience. And there have been that you certainly can get really well known and build up a great reputation by doing evangelism, because you're out there in public, and that's wonderful. But you can't make that your goal. That's just a really awesome side effect of doing a good job at what you're supposed to be doing.
I mean, by this point, you've got a lot of admirers, and me being one of them, everyone on this call being one of them, and just, yeah, you go to reInvent, right? And it's like, it's Jeff Barr. So I'm wondering if you flip that, right? Is there someone, a person or an organization that you really admire when it comes to community building?
Well, I've watched the evolution of the Linux kernel over the years, and you watch the entire community around Linux, from Linus on downward, and the entire team that he's built of all the various levels of people that own the different subsystems and review the patches and forward them up to him for the final merges. And watching that, a lot of what he has done was originally technical, but now he's really the organizer of this worldwide community that's all working together to build this incredibly complicated system with tens of millions of lines of code that runs on so many different devices and runs on Earth and runs on Mars. And it's like, that's a really just admirable thing to do. And he's really direct. He's really brusque. He doesn't answer to any marketing folks, and he can be fairly, not just terse, but he can be almost to the point of, like, okay, so, well, this is a piece of tech that I just don't like and don't respect. But he can then back it up, and he can tell you 15 reasons why he doesn't like it and doesn't respect it. And so I admire his ability to be that forthcoming about his technical opinions.
So you have been in community since 2002, but really I think you were thinking about it even before then, right? As far as like what it means to educate someone, share knowledge with someone, teach someone how you like to learn. And I'm wondering if thinking about that full kind of breadth of seeing how far community programs have come. So many organizations didn't even have them, wasn't thinking about it, weren't thinking about evangelism and advocacy. Or maybe they were sharing, product content just so like the product user could use the product, but not necessarily to become such a fan that they too would go on a subreddit and teach others how to do it. So I'm curious if across that time span, where do you think the idea of community is going today or should go in the future?
Well, I think we should have a really good mix of online and in person. When it's safe to meet again in person, uh, even before my first job at a computer store, I was a member of a computer group here in Seattle called the Northwest Computer Club. This was 1975, 1976. And that in-person community, I think, was really, really a valuable thing. And I still love and have just great admiration for user groups. In 2012, I think it was, I had spoken at so many different user groups, kind of piecemeal over the previous years, that I looked at my calendar and I found a 3 week break in my calendar at the right time of the year. And I put a little note out on the blog that said, I'm going to fly to the East Coast of the US and I'm going to drive across the country and I want to speak at a user group every night for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And it was my entire calendar filled up within probably 4 or 5 hours. And it was the most awesome thing ever to just spend the entire day driving. I would drive 300 or 400 miles a day. I'd get checked into my hotel. I'd get ready and I'd go present for 2 hours and go to these really fun user groups just all across the country. And it was just really, really neat just to see how much personal energy people would put into showing up for a user group. Like if you're in Silicon Valley or if you're in certain parts of the East Coast, there's a lot of population density. There's a lot of tech, but you get to the rest of the country, people would drive 2 or 3 hours to go to a user group meeting. And it's like these people really, they didn't go because their manager told them, yes, you must attend a user group to further your career. It was their personal interest that they went there to further. And I really admire that from all kinds of user groups. It's always people that they're self-motivated to just to show up. And if you're the organizer of a user group, even more so, you're doing it because you think this is something so interesting and so valuable. I want to make sure other people get to know more about it as well.
I'm wondering if there's anything else that we shouldn't miss sharing with the uncommon audience, that I have yet to ask you, where you're like, hey, if there's one takeaway that I wish you'd asked about that I'd like to share from my depth of expertise, it would be this. Like, how did we not cover this?
When I think about building communities, it really has to be a community that if you are either new to the community or you're not even part of it, but you're thinking about joining that community, it has to be welcoming to new folks, and it has to be welcoming to people that are maybe a little bit shy and that are not certain of themselves or their technical knowledge, and maybe the primary language of the community isn't their primary language. Having a community where you step into it and you ask an innocent question and you get a really nice reply of like, oh, okay, we recognize that you're new and we'd love to help you. We're so happy that you're a part of it. It's so important to be able to do that. And then that person's like, oh, okay, I feel like I actually belong here.
Thank you so much for your time. I do want to, I'm not sure if you've had the time to think about this yet, but as a note to our audience, we're all super excited to continue what we call uncommon support, or the Uncommon Support Fund. Because for us, it's important to embody what we believe, which is that a community is strongest when it uplifts one another. And so to that end, every time we have an interview with a community expert, we ask them to choose a STEM or a tech nonprofit whose cause and mission they really believe in and want to highlight. And then Uncommon donates in their honor. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about an organization that you chose to dedicate your uncommon support to, or that you love to support, and then obviously we'll make that donation in your honor.
Oh, sure. So that's very, very kind. So there's a local organization, or a local presentation that my wife and I attend that's called Science in the City at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle. And so Science in the City is basically they invite scientists from all over the world to come and present to adult audiences. And it's a wonderful, you can think of it as continuing education, but if you call it that, it would scare people away. So it's just interested people showing up and learning about some really interesting science-oriented topics. So that's an organization that we've attended and supported, and would love to. I'm sure they'd love the additional support from from Common Room.
Awesome. Well, we at Uncommon and at Common Room are super happy to support that. And thank you for sharing with everyone watching.
Happy to do it.
All right. Well, that's it from our Uncommon interview with a community expert, the one and only, the singular Jeff Barr. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been really fun to talk to you.